The courtroom was silent. Not a single breath, not a single movement. The two female police officers sat frozen in their seats, their mouths slightly open, their faces drained of color. They stared ahead at the woman in the judge's robe, the same black woman they had arrested just a week ago. Their minds raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. This couldn't be real. It had to be some kind of joke. But no. There she was, standing tall, calm, and powerful behind the judge's bench, the golden nameplate on her desk reading, Judge Olivia Carter. Deputy Marshall, the more aggressive of the two officers, swallowed hard. She could still see the fear in Olivia's eyes the night they threw her to the ground, pressed her face into the dirty pavement, and cuffed her like she was a criminal. Now, that same woman had the power to decide their fate. Judge Carter slowly adjusted her glasses and looked down at them. A slow smirk played on her lips as she tapped her gavel twice. "Well, well," she said, her voice steady. "Look what we have here." The air in the room was thick with tension. Even the defense attorney sitting next to the officers shifted uncomfortably. He knew there was no way to spin this. Then, in a voice so calm it sent shivers down the spines of the two officers, Judge Carter said, "Officer Marshall, Officer Blake, do you recognize me?" Neither of them answered. "Let me remind you," Olivia continued, leaning forward. "1 week ago, on a dark street in the middle of the city, you pulled me over. You accused me of a crime I didn't commit. You threw me against my own car, arrested me, and treated me like I was beneath you." She paused, letting the memory sink in. And now, here we are. A wave of murmurs swept through the courtroom. Reporters whispered among themselves. The audience members shifted forward in their seats. This was history. The two officers stared at each other, their faces twisted in a mixture of fear and disbelief. And then, Judge Carter picked up the case file in front of her. "Let's begin." 1 week earlier, the city was alive with flashing lights, sirens, and the low hum of traffic. Judge Olivia Carter had just finished a long day in court and was driving home. She was tired, but not just physically, mentally too. Every day, she sat on the bench, delivering justice, hoping to make a difference in a system that wasn't built for people like her. She sighed as she rolled down her window, letting in the cool night air. She was only a few blocks away from home when she noticed the red and blue lights flashing behind her. A police car. At first, she thought they were trying to get past her, but then she heard the siren give a short burst. They were pulling her over. Confused, she signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. She knew she hadn't been speeding, hadn't run a light. There was no reason for this. 2 officers, both women, stepped out of the patrol car. One was tall with sharp blue eyes and a permanent scowl. The other was shorter, stockier, with a buzz cut and an air of arrogance. Olivia watched them approach her vehicle, their hands already resting on their weapons. She took a deep breath and rolled down her window. "License and registration," the taller one demanded. Olivia reached for her purse slowly, making sure her movements were clear. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" The second officer, the shorter one, scoffed. "Step out of the vehicle." Olivia frowned. "Excuse me?" "You heard her. Step out." "I'd like to know why first," Olivia said firmly. She knew her rights. She had studied law, had practiced it for years, and now upheld it as a judge. The taller officer, her name tag read Marshall, narrowed her eyes. "Don't make this difficult." Olivia hesitated. Something about the way they were looking at her made her stomach twist. "Now," Officer Blake barked. Knowing that refusing could escalate the situation, Olivia slowly unbuckled her seatbelt and stepped out. She kept her hands where they could see them. The second she was out, Officer Blake grabbed her wrist and yanked it behind her back. "Hey," Olivia protested. "Got something to hide?" Marshall sneered. "What?" "No. Olivia's words were cut off as Blake shoved her against the car, pressing her cheek against the cool metal. "You fit the description of a suspect we're looking for," Marshall said. "What suspect?" Olivia gasped, wincing as the cuffs tightened around her wrists. Marshall ignored her. "Where were you an hour ago?" Olivia gritted her teeth. "I was in court." Blake laughed. "Yeah, sure." A wave of panic shot through Olivia's body. This wasn't just a traffic stop. This wasn't about a broken taillight or a missed signal. This was something else. Check her car, Marshall ordered. Blake yanked open the car door and started rummaging through Olivia's belongings. Olivia turned her head, trying to see what they were doing, but Marshall shoved her back into place. You people are always hiding something, she muttered. Olivia's chest tightened. You people. She had heard it before. She had sentenced people in her courtroom for saying things like that. But now, she was the one being treated like a criminal. You're making a mistake, Olivia said through gritted teeth. Oh yeah. Blake smirked. And who are you? Exactly? I'm Judge Olivia Carter. Silence. Marshall and Blake exchanged glances before bursting into laughter. A judge. Blake wheezed. That's a good one. I can prove it, Olivia insisted. My ID is in my purse. Marshall yanked the purse from the front seat and dumped its contents onto the ground. Olivia's wallet landed with a soft thud, the golden emblem of the city's judicial system catching the glow of the streetlights. Blake bent down, picked it up, and flipped it open. Her smirk disappeared. Marshall snatched it from her and read the ID. Her lips pressed into a tight line. A tense silence filled the air. But instead of admitting their mistake, Marshall slammed the wallet shut and tossed it back onto the pavement. Take her in, she ordered. Blake hesitated for only a second before yanking Olivia towards the patrol car. You can't do this, Olivia shouted. No, Blake sneered. Watch us. As Olivia was shoved into the back seat of the police car, she stared out the window, her heart pounding. She wasn't just angry. She was furious. And she was going to make sure they paid for what they had done. A week later, sitting in that courtroom, the two officers now understood what true fear felt like. And Judge Olivia Carter was just getting started. The silence in the courtroom was unbearable. Officers Marshall and Blake sat stiffly, their uniforms suddenly feeling like prison jumpsuits. The wooden chairs beneath them might as well have been electric chairs. Judge Olivia Carter studied them for a long moment, tapping her nails on the bench. The rhythmic sound sent shivers down the officers' spines. You both look uncomfortable, Olivia said finally, her voice smooth and even. I wonder why. Neither of them answered. She leaned back, folding her hands. Tell me, Officers Marshall and Blake, do you remember what you said to me that night? Marshall clenched her jaw. Blake shifted in her seat. Let me remind you, Olivia continued, flipping open the case file. You people are always hiding something. She let the words hang in the air. That's what you said, isn't it? Blake swallowed hard. I don't know what, Marshall started, but Olivia cut her off. Enough. The gavel struck the wood with a loud crack, making them jump. We will go through this case the proper way, Olivia said, her voice sharp as steel. Since you two seem so fond of the law, I'm going to ensure you get a fair trial. Fairer than what you gave me. Blake's fingers twitched. Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. Silence, Olivia snapped, her eyes burning into them. You lost the right to explain when you ignored my ID and threw me in the back of your patrol car like trash. The courtroom doors swung open suddenly, and a man in a sharp navy blue suit strode inside. He adjusted his tie as he walked, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. It was David Miller, the officer's attorney. David was known for being aggressive in court. He had a reputation for getting officers out of sticky situations, no matter how guilty they were. He was the defense's last hope. David reached the defense table and placed his briefcase down, flashing a fake smile. Your Honor, he began smoothly. Before we proceed, I'd like to... No, Olivia cut in. David blinked. Excuse me? You don't speak until I say you can, Olivia said coldly. Your clients were eager to show their authority that night. Let's see how they feel when the roles are reversed. David's smile faltered. He had heard about Olivia Carter. How tough she was, how she didn't tolerate injustice in her courtroom. But this was personal. The room was dead silent as Olivia tapped her gavel again. The court is now in session, she declared. And trust me, this will not be like any case you've argued before. 1 week earlier, the police station was ice cold, the fluorescent lights above buzzing faintly. Olivia sat on a metal bench in the holding cell, her hands resting on her lap. She had been in police stations before, but never like this. Never as a suspect. The door creaked open, and a male officer stepped inside. He had kind eyes, unlike the ones who arrested her. His name tag read Sergeant Roberts. "Judge Carter," he said, lowering his voice. "Are you okay?" Olivia met his gaze. He knew who she was. Finally. "I want my phone call," she said firmly. Sergeant Roberts nodded. "I'll make sure you get one." He hesitated before adding, "I also looked at the arrest report." His lips pressed into a thin line. "This is wrong." Olivia exhaled. "Then help me." Roberts glanced at the security camera in the corner of the room before lowering his voice even more. "I don't think they know who you really are." "Oh, they knew," Olivia said bitterly. "They just didn't care." Roberts sighed and unlocked the cell. "Follow me." She didn't hesitate. He led her down the hall to an empty office and handed her a phone. "Make your call." Olivia didn't waste a second. She dialed the one person she knew would burn this station to the ground if necessary. Her best friend, Rebecca Lawson. Rebecca was a high-powered defense attorney with a no-nonsense attitude. She was the kind of woman who could rip apart a prosecutor with a single sentence. And right now, Olivia needed her more than ever. The phone rang twice before Rebecca picked up. "Olivia?" Her voice was sharp with concern. "I need you," Olivia said, gripping the receiver. "Now." Rebecca didn't ask questions. "Where?" "The 12th precinct." "I'm on my way." Click. Olivia placed the phone back on the receiver and turned to Sergeant Roberts. "They're not getting away with this." He nodded. "I'll back you up." Olivia felt the smallest bit of relief. Not everyone in this department was corrupt. But those two officers? They were about to learn what real justice felt like. 30 minutes later, the police station doors flew open. Rebecca stormed inside, her heels clicking loudly against the floor. Her tailored black suit was crisp, her dark brown eyes blazing with fury. "Where is she?" she demanded. The desk sergeant, an older man with a graying beard, looked up in surprise. "And you are?" "Rebecca Lawson, defense attorney," she snapped, slamming her briefcase on the counter. "And I want my client released. Now." Officer Marshall, who had been standing by the coffee machine, smirked. "Your client?" Rebecca turned to her and raised an eyebrow. "Oh, you." She let out a humorless laugh. "You really screwed up, didn't you?" Marshall crossed her arms. She was acting suspicious. Rebecca leaned in, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "She's a judge. Do you know how stupid you sound right now?" Blake, who had just walked into the room, frowned. "Look, lady." "Shut up," Rebecca cut her off. Blake's mouth clamped shut. Rebecca turned back to the desk sergeant. "You're either going to let her out, or I'm going to make so many phone calls that by the time I'm done, this entire precinct will be drowning in lawsuits. Your choice." The desk sergeant hesitated. Then, with a sigh, he nodded to Roberts. "Let her out." Moments later, Olivia stepped out from the back hallway, still in her work clothes, still with the marks from the handcuffs on her wrists. Rebecca took one look at her, and her jaw tightened. "I'm suing them," she stated. Olivia nodded. "Good. But I have a better idea." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "What?" A slow smile spread across Olivia's face. "I'm pressing charges." Rebecca's lips curled into a smirk. "Now that's the Olivia I know." Officer Marshall and Officer Blake stood frozen, realizing the mess they had just walked into. And it was about to get a whole lot worse. Present day. Judge Olivia Carter sat back in her chair, staring down at the two officers. "Officers Marshall and Blake," she said, flipping through the pages of their file. "You have been charged with misuse of authority, unlawful arrest, falsifying a police report, and excessive force." Blake's hands gripped the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Marshall looked sick. Olivia's voice was steady, powerful. "How do you plead?" Blake opened her mouth, but before she could answer, the courtroom doors burst open. A man in a dark suit rushed inside, his face pale. He hurried to David Miller, whispering something urgently in his ear. Miller's expression hardened. Then he looked up at Olivia. "Your Honor," he said, "we have a problem." The room fell into hushed whispers. Olivia narrowed her eyes. "What kind of problem?" she asked. Miller hesitated. Then, in a voice just loud enough for everyone to hear, he said. There's been a new development. The officers are now under federal investigation. The entire courtroom erupted in gasps. Olivia tapped her gavel, hiding the satisfied smile tugging at her lips. This was getting better by the second. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Reporters whispered among themselves, their fingers flying over their phones as they sent out breaking news alerts. Spectators in the gallery gasped, some murmuring in shock while others exchanged knowing glances. Judge Olivia Carter tapped her gavel sharply. Crack, crack. Silence, she ordered. The room fell still. She turned her gaze toward David Miller, the officer's attorney. Repeat what you just said. Miller shifted uncomfortably, adjusting his tie. Your Honor, he began carefully. I've just been informed that my clients, he gestured toward Marshall and Blake, who now looked like ghosts, are being investigated by the FBI for potential civil rights violations. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Olivia kept her face expressionless, but inside, her pulse quickened. The feds? Already? That was faster than I expected. She leaned forward. Who informed you? Miller turned slightly, motioning toward the man who had whispered in his ear. A tall, broad-shouldered man in a charcoal suit stepped forward. He had slicked-back blonde hair and sharp, calculating eyes. Special Agent Kyle Henderson, FBI. He introduced himself, flashing a badge. Olivia studied him carefully. And what exactly is your role in this case, Agent Henderson? Henderson clasped his hands behind his back. My team has been investigating complaints about racial profiling and excessive force in this precinct for months. Officers Marshall and Blake's actions last week, his gaze flickered toward them, accelerated our case. Given the evidence we've gathered, the Department of Justice is stepping in. Marshall inhaled sharply. Blake let out a shaky breath. David Miller's face was tight with frustration. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. Olivia folded her hands. So, let me get this straight. The federal government is now involved? Yes, Your Honor, Henderson confirmed. Their actions against you weren't an isolated incident. We have reason to believe this department has a pattern of misconduct. Blake's face went red. This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath. Olivia's gaze snapped to her. You have something to say, Officer Blake? Blake quickly shut her mouth. Miller cleared his throat. Your Honor, in light of these new developments, I request an immediate dismissal of charges against my clients so they can deal with their federal case. Olivia smirked. Nice try, counselor. She shook her head. But no, the federal case doesn't erase what happened here. The charges against your clients still stand in this courtroom. Miller clenched his jaw. She tapped her gavel once. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. Officers Marshall and Blake, I suggest you get comfortable with the idea that for once in your careers, you won't be the ones in control. The officers stiffened as two court deputies approached, ready to escort them out. Olivia watched as they were led away, their confident postures now slumped in defeat. She didn't smile. Not yet. This was only the beginning. 1 week earlier, after Rebecca secured Olivia's release from the police station, they sat in Rebecca's sleek black BMW, parked outside the precinct. You should be at home resting, Rebecca said, gripping the steering wheel. You just spent hours in a holding cell after being humiliated in front of a department full of cops who had no idea who you were. I don't want to rest, Olivia said sharply. I want them to pay. Rebecca exhaled. And they will. But we need to be smart about this. Olivia clenched her fists. Rebecca, they didn't just arrest me. They degraded me. They treated me like I was nothing. Her voice shook with anger. If I wasn't a judge, I'd probably still be sitting in that cell. Rebecca was silent for a moment. Then she nodded. Okay, she said. Then here's what we do. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a notepad. We go after them with everything we've got. We file a lawsuit for wrongful arrest, abuse of power, and racial discrimination. But more importantly, she looked at Olivia. We expose them. Olivia's eyes narrowed. How? Rebecca's lips curled into a dangerous smirk. I make some calls. You make some calls. We pull every legal string we can. We make sure this isn't just a small case. It's a public case. Olivia leaned back in her seat, breathing deeply. Yes, that was it. That was how they would win. She turned to Rebecca. I want them in my courtroom. Rebecca's smirk widened. I thought you might. They sat in silence for a few seconds before Rebecca's expression softened. I know you, Olivia, she said. You act tough, but I also know this hurt you. Olivia looked away. It did. Rebecca nodded. Then let's make sure it never happens again. Present day. The courtroom was empty now, save for Olivia, Rebecca, and Agent Henderson. Rebecca tapped her manicured nails on Olivia's desk. You know they're going to fight this, she said. They're going to try and weasel their way out of both the federal case and this one. Olivia nodded. I know. Henderson cleared his throat. Judge Carter, I should warn you. The corruption in this department runs deep. We have evidence that Marshall and Blake are connected to higher-ups. This case could get ugly. Olivia met his gaze. Then we fight ugly. Henderson smiled slightly. That's what I was hoping you'd say. Rebecca stood up, stretching. I need coffee. You coming? Olivia shook her head. I'll stay a little longer. Rebecca gave her a knowing look, but didn't push. She and Henderson left, leaving Olivia alone in the dimly lit courtroom. She exhaled slowly, running a hand over her face. She had spent years fighting for justice. But this was personal. She stood up, straightening her robes. Tomorrow, the real battle began, and she was ready. The next morning, Olivia walked into the courtroom to find a full house. Journalists packed the benches, their cameras flashing. The gallery was filled with citizens, activists, and legal experts. This case had officially gone national. She took her seat. Bring in the defendants. The doors opened, and officers Marshall and Blake were led inside. But something was different. Marshall was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. Blake was sweating. They no longer looked defiant. They looked terrified. Rebecca leaned toward Olivia. Something's up. Before Olivia could respond, David Miller stood abruptly. Your Honor, he said, his voice tight. My clients would like to make a statement. Olivia raised an eyebrow. A statement? Marshall and Blake exchanged a look. Then Marshall stepped forward, her hands trembling. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, We want to make a deal. The room exploded. Olivia's grip on her gavel tightened. This was unexpected. What kind of deal? She asked slowly. Marshall hesitated. Then, she said something that sent chills through the entire courtroom. We'll testify, she said, swallowing hard. We'll tell you everything. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Reporters exchanged frantic glances, their fingers flying over their phones. Spectators leaned forward, some gasping, some shaking their heads in disbelief. Judge Olivia Carter tapped her gavel. Crack, crack. Silence. The room hushed instantly. She turned her gaze toward Officer Marshall, who stood at the defense table, her hands trembling. Blake sat beside her, her face pale and drenched in sweat. Olivia folded her hands. You said you want to make a deal. Marshall swallowed hard, glancing nervously at Blake before nodding. Yes, Your Honor. David Miller, their attorney, clenched his jaw. My clients. Olivia held up a hand, cutting him off. I wasn't talking to you. Miller's face burned with frustration, but he bit his tongue. He knew better than to push her. Olivia turned back to Marshall. What exactly are you offering? Marshall's lips trembled. We'll testify, she said. We'll tell you everything about this department. A stunned silence filled the courtroom. Olivia narrowed her eyes. Define everything. Marshall hesitated. Then, she let out a shaky breath and said, The corruption, the cover-ups, the people higher up pulling the strings, the illegal arrests, the money, everything. Gasps filled the room. Even Rebecca, who rarely showed shock, stiffened beside Olivia. Olivia leaned forward. You're telling me that this department is covering up criminal activity? Marshall nodded quickly. Yes. Her voice cracked. Yes, Your Honor. And if we don't speak now, we're dead. Blake let out a ragged breath, finally finding her voice. You don't understand, she said, voice barely above a whisper. We were just following orders. Olivia's gaze turned ice cold. That excuse doesn't hold up in my courtroom. Blake flinched. Miller cleared his throat, stepping forward. Your Honor, if my clients are willing to testify, we request protective custody and a reduction in charges. Olivia studied them carefully. She wasn't stupid. She had been a judge for years. She knew when someone was trying to save their own skin. But this was bigger than them. This wasn't just about two racist cops. This was about an entire system rotting from the inside out. She turned to the prosecution's table, where Assistant District Attorney James Holloway sat, arms crossed. Mr. Holloway, she said, your thoughts. Holloway, a tall black man with sharp features, leaned forward. Your Honor, we can consider a deal, but only if they provide real evidence. His gaze flickered to Marshall and Blake. Names, documents, recordings, something concrete. Marshall's hands tightened into fists. We have proof, she blurted out. The tension in the room thickened. Olivia arched an eyebrow. What kind of proof? Marshall hesitated. Then, she exhaled shakily and reached into her pocket. The court bailiff tensed, but she slowly pulled out a USB drive. This, she said, holding it up. It has everything. Blake's voice was hoarse. Audio recordings, secret reports, messages between officers and higher-ups. She swallowed hard. Even body cam footage they tried to delete. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Rebecca leaned toward Olivia, her voice low. If that drive is real, this case just got 10 times bigger. Olivia nodded slightly. She turned to the bailiff. Secure that drive. The bailiff quickly took the USB and handed it to ADA Holloway, who plugged it into his laptop. The screen flickered to life. His eyes widened. Oh my God, he whispered. The courtroom held its breath. Olivia's patience thinned. Mr. Holloway? Holloway swallowed. Your Honor, this is huge. He looked up, his voice grim. There are conversations here that go all the way up to the chief of police. The courtroom exploded in gasps and shouts. Reporters jumped from their seats, camera flashes blinding. Olivia tapped her gavel. Crack, crack. Order, she shouted. Slowly, the noise died down. Olivia turned back to Marshall and Blake. You're telling me that the police chief is involved? Marshall nodded, her face pale. Yes, and not just him. Olivia's spine tingled. Who else? Blake licked her dry lips. Judges, prosecutors, politicians. The air in the room turned deadly cold. Rebecca inhaled sharply beside Olivia. This is bigger than we thought. Olivia turned back to the officers. Her voice was like steel. If you two are lying. We're not, Marshall cut in. Look, we're not good people. We know that. But we were following orders. And now that we're turning against them, we won't make it out of this if we don't get protection. Blake nodded furiously. They'll kill us, Judge. You don't know what these people are capable of. A chilling silence settled over the courtroom. Olivia studied them both, searching their faces for any sign of deception. She saw fear. Genuine, gut-wrenching fear. She tapped her gavel once. This court will take a recess. Officers Marshall and Blake will be placed in protective custody until further notice. The bailiff moved forward, but before they could take the officers away, the doors to the courtroom burst open. Two heavily armed men in suits stormed inside. The bailiff reached for his weapon, but one of the men flashed a badge. U.S. Marshals. The lead agent stepped forward, his face tight with urgency. Your Honor, he said, we're taking the defendants into federal custody. Now. David Miller shot to his feet. On what grounds? The marshal's cold gaze settled on him. We just intercepted a credible assassination threat against your clients. The air froze. Marshall gasped. Blake whimpered. Olivia gripped the edge of her bench. From who? The marshal hesitated. Then, in a grim voice, he said, the police chief himself. The courtroom descended into madness. Reporters shouted over each other. Camera flashes lit up the room. Officers scrambled to form a barrier between the defendants and the exit. Marshall and Blake looked like they were about to faint. Rebecca turned to Olivia, eyes wide. This just became war. Olivia tapped her gavel hard, but the chaos continued. She turned to the marshals. Get them out of here. Now. The officers were quickly rushed out, disappearing through a back door. Olivia exhaled slowly. She had known this case would shake the system. But now? Now, she was staring down the most dangerous case of her career. And she wasn't sure who she could trust. The moment the U.S. Marshals escorted Officers Marshall and Blake out of the courtroom, Judge Olivia Carter knew this case had gone beyond anything she had ever handled. The police chief himself had put a hit on 2 of his own officers. This wasn't just about racism. This wasn't just about corruption. This was about power. And Olivia knew one thing for sure. People with power don't go down without a fight. The courtroom was still in chaos. Reporters practically climbing over the wooden benches to get the latest scoop. Spectators whispered frantically, some in shock, some in anger. Rebecca leaned in close to Olivia. "We need to move fast," she murmured. "If they were willing to kill their own officers, what do you think they'll do to you?" Olivia's stomach twisted. She had spent years facing criminals in court, handing out justice where it was needed. But now, she was the target. The thought sent a slow chill down her spine. She tapped her gavel hard against the bench. Crack, crack. "This court is in recess until further notice," she announced. "Bailiffs, clear the room." There were groans of protest, but she ignored them. The reporters wanted their story, but right now, she had something bigger to worry about, like staying alive. 30 minutes later, Olivia sat in her private chambers, her fingers pressed against her temples. Across from her, Rebecca paced back and forth, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. "We have to take this higher," Rebecca said, her voice urgent. "We need to alert the Attorney General. The FBI already knows, but if the Chief of Police is putting out hits, who knows how deep this goes?" Olivia nodded slowly. "We'll call the Attorney General," she said. "But first," she exhaled, "I need to talk to the mayor." Rebecca stopped pacing. "You sure about that?" Olivia hesitated. The mayor, Richard Ellison, had always presented himself as a man of the people. But Olivia had been in the legal system long enough to know politicians only care about power. If Ellison was involved in this mess, he wouldn't be an ally. But if he wasn't, he might be the only one with enough influence to help her before it was too late. "I don't have a choice," Olivia said. Rebecca sighed. "Then we better go now." An hour later, Olivia and Rebecca pulled up to City Hall. Mayor Richard Ellison's office was located in a grand, marble building with columns that made it look like something out of ancient Rome. 2 security guards met them at the entrance. "The mayor isn't taking visitors," one of them said. Rebecca didn't blink. "Tell him Judge Olivia Carter is here." The guard hesitated. Then, he picked up his radio and spoke in hushed tones. 30 seconds later, he nodded. "Follow me." The mayor's office was massive. A long mahogany desk sat at the center of the room, the city's flag hanging behind it. Mayor Ellison stood near the window, staring out over the skyline. He turned when they entered. "Judge Carter," he greeted, forcing a smile. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Olivia didn't waste time. "The chief of police put out a hit on 2 officers," she said bluntly. Ellison's expression didn't change. He simply folded his arms. "And what does that have to do with me?" Rebecca scoffed. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe because this is your city and your entire police force is under federal investigation." Ellison sighed and gestured for them to sit. "Look," he said, lowering his voice. "I've been aware of the issues in the department for a while now." Olivia raised an eyebrow. "And you did nothing?" Ellison frowned. "You think it's that easy?" he said. "I have people I answer to, Judge Carter. People who don't want this city in chaos. If the truth about the department gets out, we're looking at riots." Olivia clenched her jaw. "So you're telling me you let corruption thrive because you were scared of bad press?" Ellison didn't answer. Rebecca crossed her arms. "Either you help us, or we'll go over your head." Ellison let out a breath and rubbed his temples. "What do you want?" "Public support," Olivia said. "A press conference. Tonight." Ellison's eyes widened. "Are you insane?" "Are you?" Olivia shot back. "Because if you don't stand with us, I'll make sure your name gets dragged through the mud when this all comes out." Ellison stared at her for a long moment. Then, finally, he nodded. "Fine. I'll call a press conference." But before Olivia could feel even a hint of relief, his phone buzzed. He glanced down at the screen. Then, his face drained of color. "What is it?" Olivia asked. Ellison hesitated. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "The chief of police was just found dead." The room went silent. Rebecca was the first to recover. "Dead how?" Ellison swallowed. "Shot. Execution style. No suspects." Olivia's blood ran cold. Somebody was cleaning up loose ends. And if the chief of police had been silenced, that meant she was next. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She sat in her apartment, staring at the security cameras she had installed months ago. Every shadow outside made her heart race. Every passing car sounded like a threat. Rebecca had insisted on hiring a private security team to watch over her. Olivia had agreed. But even with them, she didn't feel safe. At exactly 2:34 a.m., her phone rang. She picked it up, her heart pounding. "Hello?" A deep, disguised voice answered. "You're in over your head, Judge Carter." Her breath caught in her throat. "Who is this?" she demanded. The voice chuckled darkly. "You should have let this go." Olivia gripped the phone tighter. "I don't scare easily." The laughter stopped. "We'll see about that," the voice said. Then, the line went dead. Olivia's hands trembled as she lowered the phone. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to calm down. Whoever was behind this was trying to intimidate her, but they had no idea who they were dealing with. She grabbed her phone and dialed Rebecca. "We need to move faster," she said the moment her friend answered. Rebecca was silent for a beat. Then, she said, "Pack a bag. I'll pick you up in 10 minutes. Olivia stood, her jaw set. She wasn't backing down. No matter what it took, she was going to bring all of them down, even if it killed her. The black SUV pulled up outside Olivia's apartment exactly 10 minutes later. She stepped outside with nothing but a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Inside were only the essentials: some clothes, her laptop, and a loaded Glock 19 she had kept locked away for emergencies. This was an emergency. Rebecca was behind the wheel, her face set in stone. The usual sass and sarcasm she carried like a badge were gone. In their place was something colder, something deadly. "Get in," she ordered. Olivia didn't hesitate. She climbed into the passenger seat, slamming the door shut. Rebecca peeled away from the curb, taking sharp turns and switching lanes like she was being followed. And they probably were. "Where are we going?" Olivia asked, glancing over her shoulder. Rebecca's grip tightened on the wheel. "Somewhere safe." Olivia frowned. "Define safe." Rebecca exhaled through her nose. "An old client of mine owes me a favor. He's off the grid. No social security number, no credit cards, nothing. We'll be ghosts." Olivia didn't argue. Right now, she needed to disappear. Because whoever had killed the chief of police wasn't going to stop there. They wanted to wipe the slate clean. And Olivia Carter was the last name on the list. They drove for 3 hours. Out of the city, past the suburbs, into a wooded area where the roads were nothing but dirt and gravel. Finally, Rebecca pulled up to a cabin. It was small but sturdy, hidden deep in the woods with no visible neighbors. The kind of place you wouldn't stumble upon by accident. Rebecca killed the engine. "We stay here until we figure out our next move." Olivia nodded and stepped out. The air smelled like pine and damp earth. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. The door to the cabin opened. A man stepped out, his frame massive. He was over 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, with scars on his hands that suggested he had seen things. His dark eyes scanned them carefully. Rebecca smirked. "Olivia, meet Darius King. Ex-Special Forces. Retired. Runs private security now." Darius didn't smile. He just nodded. "Inside. Now." Olivia followed Rebecca through the doorway, her body on high alert. The cabin was bare. No personal decorations, no family pictures. Just guns. Lined up on the wall, locked in glass cases. Darius shut the door and turned to them. "Who's after you?" Rebecca looked at Olivia. "Tell him." Olivia took a deep breath. "Corrupt cops. The chief of police was just murdered. Someone is covering their tracks, and I'm next." Darius didn't flinch. "Whoever it is, they've got money. Power." Olivia nodded. "And they'll do anything to keep it." Darius rubbed his jaw. "You're not safe here long term. If they really want you dead, they'll find you. Rebecca crossed her arms. So what do we do? Darius sat down, his gaze locked on Olivia. We stop waiting. We hit first. Olivia frowned. What do you mean? Darius leaned forward. These kinds of people? They don't expect a counterattack. They expect you to hide, to beg for protection. But if you want to survive, if you want to win, he paused. Then, his lips curled into a slow, dangerous smirk. You take the fight to them. Meanwhile, back in the city, a man in an expensive suit sat in his dimly lit office, fingers drumming against his desk. His name was Victor Calloway, billionaire, business tycoon, and the man pulling all the strings. A police captain stood in front of him, shifting nervously. Sir, the judge is gone. She vanished before we could. Calloway slammed his fist onto the desk, making the captain flinch. I don't want excuses, he said coldly. I want results. The captain swallowed. We have teams searching for her. Calloway exhaled slowly. Find her. And when you do, he leaned back, his voice dropping to a whisper. Make it look like an accident. The captain nodded and hurried out of the office. Calloway reached for his glass of whiskey, swirling the amber liquid inside. Judge Olivia Carter had no idea who she was up against, but she would soon. And when she did, it would be too late. Back at the cabin, Darius placed a black duffel bag onto the wooden table. He unzipped it. Inside were guns, burner phones, encrypted laptops, and a set of fake IDs. Rebecca arched an eyebrow. You always this prepared? Darius smirked. Old habits. Olivia stepped closer. So what's the plan? Darius leaned over the table. We find out who's behind this. We dig. And when we do, his dark eyes met Olivia's. We burn them down before they can touch you. Olivia nodded. She had spent her whole career upholding the law. But now? Now, she was about to go outside it. And she wasn't looking back. The rain pounded against the cabin's wooden roof, each drop echoing through the silence as Olivia stared at the weapons laid out before her. She had spent her career inside the system, writing verdicts, handing down sentences, believing in the power of the law. But now? Now she was being hunted by the very people who were supposed to uphold justice. Now, Victor Calloway's men were combing the city, trying to erase her like she was just another problem to be swept under the rug. And now, she had a choice. Wait to be caught, or fight back. She picked up one of the pistols from the bag and ran her fingers over the cold metal. It had been years since she held a gun. The weight of it felt heavier than she remembered. Darius watched her from the other side of the table, his dark eyes sharp. You ever shot someone before? Olivia met his gaze. No. Rebecca, who had been scrolling through her phone looking for updates on the case, let out a short laugh. Well, let's hope you don't have to start now. Darius didn't smile. Hope is a bad strategy. He turned to Olivia, his voice serious. I need to know, are you ready for this? Because once we start, there's no turning back. Olivia exhaled. Was she ready? The Olivia from 2 weeks ago. The judge who believed in the system, who trusted that the truth always won, would have said no. But the Olivia standing here, in a cabin deep in the woods, knowing that Victor Calloway had already killed once and would kill again. She tightened her grip on the gun. I'm ready. Darius nodded. Then let's get to work. Meanwhile, in the city, Victor Calloway sat in his penthouse office, staring at the wall-to-wall screen set up in front of him. On one of them, the news played. Judge Olivia Carter remains missing after recent revelations of corruption within the city's police department. Sources suggest that federal investigators are now involved. The mayor has called for an emergency meeting to address the allegations. Calloway muted the screen. He didn't care what the news said. He cared about one thing, control. And right now, things were slipping. A man in a black suit stood near the window, his hands behind his back. His name was Leon Briggs, and he was Calloway's fixer. The man you called when you needed problems to disappear. We've searched every possible hideout, Briggs said. Her apartment, her office, even her mother's place. Nothing. Calloway sighed and poured himself a glass of whiskey. She's not alone, he said. Someone's helping her. Briggs nodded. We're working on that. But sir, if she goes public, Calloway's grip tightened on his glass. She won't. Briggs hesitated. You sure? Calloway turned, his gaze cold as ice. Find her. Kill her. And make it loud. Briggs nodded once and walked out. Calloway downed his whiskey in one gulp. This city belonged to him. And no judge, not even Olivia Carter, was going to change that. Back at the cabin, Darius pulled up a laptop and connected the encrypted drive that Marshall and Blake had given them before they were taken into federal custody. The screen filled with folders. Rebecca leaned over his shoulder. What are we looking at? Darius clicked into a folder labeled Financial Transactions. A long list of bank transfers popped up. Olivia frowned. Those are bribes. Darius nodded. And not just to cops. Look at this. He clicked another folder, this one filled with recorded phone calls. They listened to the first one. A deep voice, one that Olivia recognized instantly as Victor Calloway's, spoke. If Carter doesn't back down, she dies. And make sure it looks like an accident. Olivia's stomach turned to ice. It was him. Darius smirked. Well, that's enough to bury him. Rebecca exhaled. Yeah, if we live long enough to use it. Darius turned to Olivia. What's the move? Olivia clenched her fists. We go public. Rebecca's eyes widened. Are you insane? They'll come for you the second we release this. Olivia nodded. They already are. But if we leak this file to the right people, reporters, federal agents, everyone, we make it impossible for Calloway to bury it. Darius nodded. Then we'll need a secure location to send the files. Rebecca grabbed her phone. I know just the place. She typed a number and hit call. A deep voice answered. This is Agent Kyle Henderson, FBI. Rebecca smirked. Hey, Kyle. You still owe me a favor. 1 hour later, Darius set up a secure connection and started the upload. As the progress bar inched forward, Olivia paced the room. Every second that passed, she expected a black SUV to come screeching through the woods, armed men spilling out, guns blazing. But nothing came. Not yet. Almost there, Darius muttered. Another minute, then, a sound outside. Rebecca froze. Did you hear that? Darius grabbed his gun and motioned for them to stay back. He moved toward the window, his movements silent, practiced. Olivia's pulse hammered in her ears. Darius peered outside, then cursed under his breath. Black SUVs, he whispered. 4 of them. Olivia's blood ran cold. They found us. Rebecca grabbed her pistol. How much longer on the upload? Darius checked. 30 seconds. They didn't have 30 seconds. Outside, footsteps crunched against the gravel. Then, a voice. Come out now, Judge Carter, Briggs called. Or we come in. Silence. Olivia exhaled slowly. No, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She grabbed her gun and chambered around. Rebecca smirked. Damn, I was hoping you'd do that. Darius glanced at the laptop. 5 seconds left. He looked at Olivia. On your go. She nodded. And then, all hell broke loose. The first gunshot shattered the silence. Glass exploded as a bullet ripped through the cabin window, embedding itself in the wooden wall just inches from Olivia's head. Darius moved first, grabbing Olivia and Rebecca and dragging them down behind the couch. Stay low, he barked. Another shot, then another. The sound of heavy boots crunched against the gravel outside. Victor Calloway's men were moving in. Olivia's heart pounded. She gripped the pistol in her hands, her knuckles white. She had never been in a gunfight before, but she wasn't about to die in this cabin without a fight. Darius crawled toward the laptop. The upload bar was at 99%. Almost there. Come on, come on. Rebecca pulled her own gun from her holster. We can't stay boxed in, she hissed. They'll burn this place down if they have to. Darius nodded. We need to move. Outside, Briggs' voice rang out. Judge Carter, he called, his tone almost mocking. This doesn't have to be messy. Come out now and we'll make it quick. Rebecca scoffed. How generous. Darius pulled out a flashbang grenade from his duffel bag. When I throw this, we move. We go out the back and hit the tree line. Olivia's stomach twisted. What about the upload? Darius glanced at the screen. 99.9%. Just a few more seconds, he whispered. Then, The front door blasted open. A black-clad gunman stepped inside, rifle raised. Darius didn't hesitate. He pulled the pin on the flashbang and hurled it. "Close your eyes," he shouted. Boom. A blinding white light filled the cabin. A high-pitched ring followed. The gunman screamed, clutching his face. Darius grabbed Olivia's wrist and yanked her toward the back door. "Go! Go!" They rushed out into the cold night, Rebecca right behind them. The darkness of the trees swallowed them whole. Behind them, Briggs cursed loudly. "Find them!" Flashlights flickered to life. Shadows moved. The hunt was on. The forest was a battlefield. Darius led the way, moving silently between the trees. Olivia and Rebecca followed, their breaths coming in sharp, quiet gasps. Shouts echoed behind them. The men were spreading out. "We need to reach the road," Darius whispered. "If we can get to a car." A gunshot tore through the air. The tree next to Olivia's head splintered. "Run!" They sprinted forward, weaving through the trees as more gunfire rang out behind them. Bullets whizzed past. Then, Rebecca tripped. Olivia skidded to a stop and whirled around. Rebecca was on the ground, clutching her ankle. Darius grabbed Olivia's arm. "We have to move." "I'm not leaving her." Olivia snapped. Darius cursed. He turned back, yanked Rebecca up, and threw her arm over his shoulder. "Move." They pushed forward. The road was ahead. A single black SUV sat on the dirt shoulder. Darius grinned. "Lucky us." They rushed toward it. Then, a dark figure stepped in front of the SUV. Briggs. Gun raised. Face cold. "You don't run from Victor Calloway," he said. "You die tired." Olivia's hands shook. The pistol in her grip felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Darius moved first. He grabbed his gun and fired. Briggs dove to the side, returning fire. The bullet grazed Darius' shoulder. He grunted but didn't stop moving. Olivia's blood boiled. She lifted her gun. Briggs turned toward her. Smirked. "You're not a killer, Judge." Her finger tightened on the trigger. Briggs lunged forward. Bang. A single gunshot. Briggs stumbled. His smirk faded. Then, he dropped. Dead. Olivia's hands shook violently. Rebecca blinked. "Did you just?" Darius stepped forward and checked the body. He exhaled. "He's gone." Olivia felt numb. She had just killed a man. Darius grabbed her by the shoulders. "Look at me," he said firmly. Her breathing hitched. "You had no choice," he said. "He was going to kill you." Olivia swallowed hard. "I know." Rebecca grunted. "We can unpack this later." "We need to move." Darius nodded. He grabbed the SUV keys off Briggs' belt and tossed them to Olivia. "Drive." Olivia caught them, exhaled sharply, and slid into the driver's seat. Rebecca and Darius piled in. Olivia's hands still trembled, but she turned the key anyway. The engine roared to life. Darius turned toward the laptop on his lap. He checked the screen. Then, he grinned. "The upload finished," he said. "The whole world knows now." Rebecca let out a breathless laugh. "Holy shit." Olivia exhaled. It was done. They had just exposed Calloway. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. Because Victor Calloway had just lost. And men like him? They didn't go down without a final fight. The SUV roared down the dirt road, kicking up dust as Olivia gripped the wheel with shaking hands. The weight of what had just happened sat heavy on her chest. She had killed a man. Briggs. Calloway's right-hand enforcer. The image of him falling played over and over in her mind. The way his smirk had vanished. The way his body had hit the ground. She swallowed hard, forcing the thought away. There was no time for guilt. Not yet. Darius, sitting in the passenger seat, glanced at her. "You okay?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. Rebecca, from the back seat, let out a heavy breath. "We're still alive, so I'd say that's a win." She pulled out her phone and checked the news. Then, her eyes widened. "Holy shit," she whispered. Darius turned. "What?" Rebecca flipped the screen around. The entire internet was on fire. Breaking news. Judge Olivia Carter's leak exposes massive police corruption. Investigation underway. Calloway implicated in bribery, murder plots, and election interference. Federal prosecutors confirm multiple arrests. Darius grinned. We did it. But Olivia wasn't smiling. She tightened her grip on the wheel. It's not over. Rebecca raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? Calloway's empire is crumbling. Olivia shook her head. Not yet. You don't take down someone like Victor Calloway with just news reports. He still has powerful friends. He still has money. Darius's smirk faded. She's right. He's going to make a move. Rebecca's phone buzzed again. A new headline flashed on the screen. Her face went pale. Olivia saw the look in her eyes. What? Rebecca's hands shook as she read the news out loud. Victor Calloway escapes federal raid. Nowhere to be found. The car fell dead silent. Darius cursed under his breath. He ran. Rebecca exhaled sharply. We should have known. A guy like Calloway doesn't just sit and wait for the feds to knock on his door. Olivia felt it then. The creeping sensation of unfinished business. Her stomach twisted. He's coming for us. Darius nodded grimly. And he's not coming alone. Meanwhile, somewhere in the city, Victor Calloway sat in the back of a limousine, his jaw tight, his hands clenched into fists. His empire was burning. The files Olivia Carter had leaked had triggered FBI raids, arrests, and media firestorms. His name, once untouchable, was now plastered across every major network. He had lost everything, and he knew exactly who was responsible. His phone buzzed. He picked it up. Speak. A gravelly voice responded. We found them. Calloway's lips curled into a slow, dangerous smile. Good, he said. End this. The call ended. Calloway leaned back against the leather seat, swirling the whiskey in his glass. Judge Olivia Carter thought she had one. She was dead wrong. Back in the SUV, Darius's phone vibrated. He pulled it out, checked the screen, then froze. Rebecca noticed the change in his expression. What? Darius's voice was tight. They're tracking us. Olivia's stomach dropped. How? Darius turned the phone around. A red blinking dot was moving toward their location. Fast. Rebecca's breath hitched. They put a tracker on the car. Darius cursed. I should have checked first. That SUV belonged to them. We played right into their hands. Olivia's grip on the wheel tightened. How much time do we have? Darius's face was grim. Minutes. Maybe less. Rebecca inhaled sharply. We need to ditch the car. Olivia swerved hard, taking an exit onto a narrow road leading toward the mountains. Trees blurred past them. We'll lose them in the forest, she said. Darius pulled his gun. And if we don't? Olivia's jaw set. Then we make our last stand. Minutes later, the SUV skidded to a stop deep in the forest. The tires sank into the wet earth as Olivia, Rebecca, and Darius jumped out. Darius yanked the tracker from underneath the car and smashed it with his boot. Rebecca glanced over her shoulder. Headlights were coming. Fast. Move. They sprinted into the trees. Behind them, multiple black SUVs pulled up. Doors swung open. Men poured out. Armed. Trained. Deadly. Then, a voice. You can't run, Carter. Olivia froze. Victor Calloway stepped out of the lead SUV. He was dressed in black, his usual smug arrogance replaced with pure, murderous rage. His eyes locked onto hers. And then he smiled. This ends tonight. A gunshot split the night. The gunshot echoed through the cold night air, and for a split second, Olivia's heart stopped. She flinched, her body bracing for impact. But there was no pain. She opened her eyes to see the flash of a muzzle just feet from her. Calloway's men were ready to take her down. She moved first, instinct kicking in. She dove behind a large rock, pulling Rebecca and Darius with her. The bullets flew, but they were safe, for now. Darius pulled out his gun, his eyes scanning the trees. Stay low. Move fast. We have one shot at this. Olivia nodded, her hands still shaking. The adrenaline was rushing through her veins, a dizzying mixture of fear and determination. This was it, the final showdown. Victor Calloway stood just outside the perimeter of the clearing, his eyes cold and calculating as he spoke. You think you can expose me, Carter? You think you're the one who gets to take down the untouchable? Olivia's breath came in short bursts as she peered over the rock. She didn't flinch when Calloway's men advanced, but her heart hammered in her chest. She had no choice. The battle had come to her. Darius motioned to Rebecca. We go left. You take the right. Now. Without a word, Olivia watched as Darius and Rebecca split. She saw them scatter through the trees, taking cover while the sound of their gunshots rang out in quick succession. Calloway's men returned fire, but Olivia could see the panic in their eyes. The element of surprise was on her side. She rose to her feet, moving quickly toward a thick tree trunk for cover. Her body ached from the tension, from the fear. She couldn't let up, not now. From her vantage point, she spotted Calloway, standing tall, confident as ever. He hadn't moved since the gunshot. He had to think he had all the control. Olivia didn't hesitate. She raised her gun, and she fired. The shot landed squarely in his shoulder, sending him spinning back. Calloway staggered back, blood dripping down his arm, but his eyes never left Olivia. You think you've won? He growled. This is far from over. Darius appeared, moving quickly to her side, his gun drawn. Rebecca was close behind, covering them. Calloway's remaining men were scattering, confused and disoriented. Some took cover, others began to retreat into the darkness. But Calloway himself stood tall, gritting his teeth through the pain. Darius smirked. It's over, Calloway. You're done. Calloway's expression twisted into a sneer, but his hands lowered. He knew the game was up. Olivia, heart still pounding, stepped forward. You've taken enough lives, Victor. She kept her gun trained on him. But not mine. The last of his men had vanished into the woods. It was just the three of them now, standing in the cold, dark forest with the weight of the world on their shoulders. For a long moment, Calloway just stared. His confidence had cracked, and Olivia could see the fear in his eyes now. It wasn't the fear of losing power. It was the fear of facing someone who refused to back down. She took a slow step forward, her voice low. This is where it ends. All your money, all your connections, your empire. It's all in ruins now. And you're going down. Darius moved in closer, keeping his gun trained on Calloway. Calloway didn't say a word. He slumped. Olivia's pulse began to slow, and with it, the weight of what she had just done hit her. She had stood in the face of everything she believed in and fought with everything she had, and now it was over. Olivia looked down at the man who had been at the top of the food chain, the man who had been behind the suffering of so many people. He had tried to destroy her, but in the end, she destroyed him. Rebecca stepped forward. You did it, Olivia. You did it. Olivia didn't respond. She just nodded. There was a lingering sense of relief in her chest, but also emptiness. The adrenaline was wearing off, and she felt the crushing weight of exhaustion. Darius, noticing her change in demeanor, looked at her. You okay? Olivia let out a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, I'm good. Rebecca grinned. You look like you need a drink. Olivia couldn't help but smile. Yeah, I think I do. 2 days later, Olivia sat in her office, the soft hum of the courthouse around her. The news was still buzzing. Reports of Calloway's arrest were everywhere. The FBI had already seized all his assets, and the scandal that had started with her had unraveled everything. She stared at the pile of papers on her desk, cases to review, decisions to make, the weight of her responsibilities never ending. But for the first time in days, she allowed herself to take a breath. The system was still broken, still in need of change, but the fight she had started had already begun to make a difference. And she had won. For herself, for the people she had sworn to protect, and for justice. Olivia stood up, walking over to the window. She stared out at the city, knowing that it would never be the same. But maybe, just maybe, it would be better, because she had learned that sometimes you had to fight the system from the inside out, and sometimes you had to break the rules in order to bring justice to the ones who needed it most. And as long as she was still breathing, she would keep fighting.